Oh, yes.
Welcome back once again, everyone. Today we're taking a look at the vintage head sculpt Masters of the Universe Origins Skeletor. This toy is a rehash of the Wave 1 figure, given a new head, which is meant to look much more like the head of the original 1980 Skeletor toy. And it kind of comes as like a running change or variant for the fifth wave of figures. There's also a matching He-Man with a vintage head that I reviewed previously to this. Just like my He-Man, this guy's card back has been completely removed from his blister en route. So that's annoying. It's really annoying. Luckily, nothing inside is damaged, so I can't be too upset, but God, Amazon, man. Gotta step up your game. You make way too much money to be cheaping out on the packaging. Anyway, if you've seen my reviews before, you know this goes. We're gonna take a look at Skeletor's very open packaging. Then we'll pull everything out. We'll get a quick look at his mini comic, and then we'll see Skeletor himself. Check out his new head. Check out the new power sword he comes with, because he comes with the whole power sword piece instead of the half piece like the original. Which is actually kind of backwards, right? That the new head sculpt one has the original sword, but the old head sculpt one has the new sword. I'll probably swap them when I have them on display, just to make this feel more authentic to the old 1980s toy. Naturally, I'll be doing plenty of group shots and comparisons today, especially with the Wave 1 Skeletor. And then at the end of the video, I'll give my final thoughts. So Skeletor comes in pretty much the same packaging the Wave 1 figure came in. The only difference being there's no new for 20 call out, since we are now in the year 2021. We still got the logo, his name, his title, the retro play thing. You see the Wave 5 mini comic in the background, which stars Fisto and Faker. And then we get, oh boy, it is just falling apart. All right, let's set this to the side. We'll just look at the card back. All right, so we get our card back. Same old artwork as Wave 1. Same flavor text. The nefarious overlord Skeletor wants to control the power within Castle Grayskull. Shows you how to fit his Havoc staff in his hand, how to pose him. And then we get our cross cells. So new He-Man, new Skeletor. Then we get Faker, Fisto, 2002 Colors Evil In, Lords of Power Merman. So pretty cool. Like I said with He-Man, it's a very interesting wave with a lot of neat little Easter eggs and call-outs and stuff. All right, so we've seen this. Let's go ahead and see what's inside. Here's our mini comic for this wave. And again, it's Sucker Punch. And it just deals with Faker disguised as He-Man, ambushing Fisto. Fisto figured out, get the better of him. And then Skeletor alluding to having a whole Faker army. So, pretty short one, honestly. I mean, I guess they're all about the same length, but this one just feels a little shorter than the rest. And then we get our cross cells. You know, again, He-Man, Faker, Skeletor, Fisto, Evelyn, and Merman. And now we get to see Skeletor in hand. You can see that I'm having him wield his Havoc staff, and then I have his sword stashed in like the back strap of his harness there. Now, because he does come with that complete sword, it creates a bit of an issue when it comes to weapon storage or having to wield his weapons. Like his Wave 1 counterpart, he only has one hand that's molded for actually holding weapons, which is the same as the He-Man figure. However, He-Man's chest harness actually has a little loop made in the back that hangs off that allows you to store either of his weapons on his back, so that he can swap them out and always have somewhere for the other one to go. Now you can see I just have the sword kind of slipped in the straps of his. This Havoc staff, because of the big ball on the end of it here, will not fit in there. Even the circumference of the shaft itself is too big, and there's really no way to just slide it in there. I've tried, like, just undoing the strap, putting it in and closing it, but it is so big around that it's pretty much impossible to close this around it. You might be able to make it stretch and stuff, but then, you know, you're really looking at damaging your figure. So, sadly, your only options seem to either be, you know, stuff the sword in the back or just leave the staff out entirely if you wanted to wield the sword. And that is something that's kind of unfortunate about this particular build. As far as, you know, the core figure itself, he's built virtually exactly the same as the Wave 1 figure. Same parts, same colors. He's just got a new face here. And the face, it's an interesting trade-off. Unlike the vintage head He-Man, where the new head is clearly much more vintage-inspired, this one, while it gets the expression right of just kind of a closed smile, the coloring and all that is actually further from the way the vintage toy looked than, you know, the Wave 1 figure. And we'll get a look at that here in a second. Now here is the Wave 1 figure, so we can see this comparison. So you see the way that his light green and dark green, they're not blended together in a gradient like they are here. It's more of just kind of a light green splotch right on the front of the face. That's actually how it's supposed to look. And the bigger, kind of messier looking eyes are also closer to the original head sculpt and paint job than this one, where the eyes are, they're much smaller, they're a little more precisely painted. And yeah, it's a weird trade-off where the sculpting is better, but the color is actually further off. The other thing you'll notice is the sword is different, right? This is the half sword version, where, see on this side, it combines with the silver half that comes with He-Man to create the actual power sword. This is the one that is more accurate to the vintage toy. So if you are going for that pure vintage look, the closest you're going to get sculpt-wise is this head with this sword. But that discrepancy with the face paint, kind of throws things in a bit of a loop, because now, the actual paint on the face is going to look a bit off. So there is no, 100% best answer. And even if you have the Battle Armor Skeletor, which does use the same sculpt, he also opts for basically this exact paint job on the face, so that one's not going to get you closer. Plus the hood is also a slightly darker color because the Battle Armor one is a darker color armor for whatever reason. So it's something that can be a little frustrating if you're in pursuit of like pure vintage nostalgia, because there's not going to be a perfect answer. Unlike what we saw with the new He-Man head sculpt, you can't really get it 100%. You're going to have to make a trade-off somewhere. Now for another group shot with our Battle Armor Skeletor right here in the middle, I want to just kind of demonstrate, similarly to what I did with He-Man, how you can kind of swap their swords around and just make it work a little bit better. Now we know that neither of the standard Skeletors have a dedicated place to store their sword. But, as we see with the half-sword variety, this extra grip right here, or grip guard on the handle, can be used to let the sword actually sit in the open hand and have it be wielded in some way. Also, the Battle Armor toy comes with the half-sword design, but is actually supposed to have the full sword design, like this guy has. So what you can do, if you want to make the most vintage-accurate Skeletor as possible, you can give the full sword to your Battle Armor toy. Just have him wield it there, hold his hand, whatever you want to do. The color is a little bit lighter than it should be. This is a slightly darker purple, and it's got a little bit more of a glitter effect going on, which matches his chest piece there. So if you don't want the color of this messing up the vintage appeal of this guy, go ahead and swap swords with the Wave 1 version. So, put that sword in his hand. Like so. If you can get it to go. Depending on the actual shape of the individual hands, it may be harder or easier to plug them in there. So you can give him that weapon. And then you can give the darker one to this guy, since he's not, very vintage accurate anyway. He doesn't necessarily need the most accurate sword. And this is similar to what I did with my He-Man toys. Now personally, I even take it a step further than this. I don't have my regular Skeletors even wield their halves of the power sword. I just give those to the, regular He-Man figures and have them just wield the combined sword. Then you don't even have to worry about having these guys precariously, wield their swords in their open hand or having to set their staff down. It's up to you if you want to, go that route or just have them hold on to the swords. Or, they are thin enough to where you can stuff them in their little back strap, which this works a lot better because it's a dedicated loop, which still doesn't actually fit the staff. Like, there is no way to get him to just, put his staff away other than just drop it on the ground, which is a real shame. So, yeah, whether you just want to pass your sword halves off to your He-Man figures or just have them be wielded or stored with these guys, this does give you probably the most 80s accurate take on at least these two figures. This guy is just kind of your fodder as a non-vintage accurate version of a Skeletor toy. And for our final group shot of the evening, we have Skeletor with his arch nemesis, He-Man, and this is the vintage head He-Man. So now these two, really match in their 80s nostalgia. You can see, as I said I would, I'm giving Skeletor's sword half to He-Man so we can have the combined power sword. And really just get that nice early 80s nostalgia vibe here. Now, one thing I will say, I got a lot of feedback on the video for this guy when I, went into detail about swapping swords around. A lot of people, it seems, and possibly more than the alternative, don't seem to care less about getting the actual like vintage accurate sword. They actually prefer the single piece sword because it's nicer looking. And I do agree it is nicer looking, so it always comes down to your priorities. I mean, if you think that your Skeletor or your He-Man look better with just that one single piece sword that admittedly is much nicer looking, and that's what you want to do, I mean, by all means, disregard, my whole convoluted scheme here. That's really just more for people that are trying to get just that maximum amount of 80s nostalgia out of their toys. But either way, whether you have these guys wielding, this, or the sword that they actually come packaged with, this is a really nice blast from the past in both forms. Again, Skeletor's face, it's not perfect. The paint, is neater than it actually should be. Now, it is better looking than the vintage toy, don't get me wrong. The vintage toy was, had a very sloppy looking paint job on the face, but that is also kind of part of the nostalgia. So you may prefer the new paint scheme, you may dislike it. And it's really going to depend on just your personal preferences. And this completes our look on the new take on Origins Skeletor. I will say that I don't think this toy is quite as good as his Wavemate He-Man, both in the execution of the vintage style head, which I think He-Man pulls off much, much better, and just, kind of Skeletor as a toy overall. Unlike He-Man, he does not have, enough good places to store or wield all of his accessories. And unlike the Wave 1 Skeletor, his sword's not even made in a way to where you can kind of cheat it and just slide it over his open hand here to let him dual wield. And, the staff doesn't go in his back straps or anything. He-Man doesn't have that issue. Like, his sword or his axe can be placed in his harness and then he can wield the other one. The Skeletor is a little bit lacking in that department. So I think the whole, sword fix thing I showed you guys really helps in that regard. Either just to give his sword up to He-Man, if you, swap it for that half sword, or have him wield a half sword directly. But as is, I do find him to be a little bit lacking. Because as cool as it is to have a full, purple power sword, it's not that great when he can't wield it without giving up his other weapon. So yeah, it's not my favorite. And again, even though the face sculpt is more vintage inspired, I actually find myself preferring the colors of the Wave 1 figure. So I think he's honestly a little bit of a downgrade in my opinion. That being said, if you didn't get the Wave 1 Skeletor and you're having a hard time finding it, this could be a viable alternative. I know he's still pretty readily available on Amazon for retail price. That's where I got these, because I've never seen these versions actually in stores. So that's where I would look for this if you're, looking for either, a better take on Skeletor or your first Skeletor toy in general. And he's not a bad figure by any means, but I do feel he lags behind He-Man just a little bit on the points that I mentioned. Of course, that is just my take on the Skeletor, so now I want to know what you all think of it. Do you find this to be an upgrade or a downgrade to the Wave 1 figure? Do you prefer having the whole sword vice the half sword, or do you not like the way, it doesn't really work as well for him? Any and all feedback's always welcome in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to toss it a like, let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this look at the MOTU Origins Wave 5 Vintage Head Skeletor. And with all that said, I will see you next time.